The autumn of 1959 in the small Norwegian port town of Loftholm began with the usual dampness, constant wind and the smell of rotting fish, which soaked into clothes as well as into skin. People here have long since stopped being surprised by the strangeness of the sea. It could give away everything it once took, but it never explained why. Fishermen often returned with stories of ghostly lights in the fog, of old ship hulls flashing among the waves and then disappearing as if nothing had happened. But that year, an envelope appeared in the city, and everything changed. The envelope arrived at the post office early in the morning. The first thing the postman, an old man named Arvid, noticed was that the letter smelled of the sea, not just wet paper, but real ocean wind, iodine and rust. The paper was thick and yellow, as if it had been in a drawer for decades. It was stamped Westfalen. There was no name or address of the sender, just this inscription and the coordinates, written in a flourish, in ink that seemed to have faded from salt water. Arvid turned the envelope over in his hands for a long time, not daring to open it, but then curiosity got the better of him. Inside was a piece of paper folded in four. Only a few words were written on it in shaky handwriting: "Help. We're here. 56 degrees 12 minutes north, 11 degrees 45 minutes west." And a signature that could not be deciphered. He sat for a long time looking at these lines, feeling a sticky fear rise inside, as if someone else's hand had touched his shoulder. These coordinates didn't tell him anything, but the old man knew about the ship that disappeared in those waters. About the Westfall, a wartime supply ship that disappeared in 1942. It was said that his last radio message was illegible, only the phrases, "Fog, not our course, the sky is shaking," and then silence. No wreckage, no traces of the crew. It was all blamed on a hurricane, but the sailors never forgot that name. Arvid handed over the letter to the police station. The officer on duty laughed at first, thinking that someone was joking, but when he saw the date on the postmark, the laughter stopped. The print was clear, October 1959, but the paper and ink themselves clearly belonged to another era. After a short meeting, the envelope was sent to Bergen, where such anomalies were dealt with, and the coordinates were transferred to the Maritime Administration. A few days later, the Sigurd research vessel sailed from the coast. The team consisted of 7 people: Captain Einar, young engineer Lars, hydrologist Jun, chief mechanic Thorvald, radio operator Helga, Dr. Vigo and a representative of the Ministry of Transport, a stern man named Melberg. They all knew that they were only going to check an empty spot, perhaps old garbage, perhaps an iceberg, but still, in the depths of each sat the same cold interest: what if? The weather on the day of the release was sticky. The wind brought dense gray fog from the sea, visibility was no more than 30 meters, and only the monotonous sound of the engine penetrated this thick veil. Helga fixed the coordinates, and Einar increasingly looked at the compass, which, as luck would have it, began to twitch from time to time, as if the needle could not determine where the north was. On the third day of the journey, the instruments showed an anomaly: underwater, several miles from a given point, the echo sounder noted the contours of a large metal hull. The bottom in this area was flat, sandy, and there should not have been any wrecks. As the ship got closer, the sea seemed to quiet down. No seagulls, no wind, just the sound of water hitting the sides. When the first beam of the searchlight slid across the surface, everyone saw it. The hull of a huge transport vessel, deathly gray, lay at an angle, partially protruding from the water. On board, through the rust and sea growths, one could read the faded letters, Westfalen. At first, they thought it was impossible. The ship could not have been preserved like this. According to the documents, it sank more than 17 years ago. But the hull looked like it had sunk just a couple of years ago. The paint, though peeling, still held. There were footprints on the deck, as if someone had recently walked there, leaving dirty boot prints. Einar ordered the boat to be lowered. The first 3 people, Lars, Torvald and Jun, climbed onto the deck through a rusty ladder. They expected to see dead silence, but instead they heard a barely perceptible creak, as if the boards had bent under someone. Lars turned on the flashlight, nothing. Only emptiness, the whistling of the wind in the holds. But the further they went, the more they felt that they were not alone. In the cabins, everything was as if the crew had just gone out for a minute, blankets on the bunks, mugs with dried coffee remnants, magazines and navigation charts dated 1942, but with corrections made in fresh ink. The strangest thing is the entries in the margins. Short phrases: light on the horizon, time goes differently, we hear their footsteps. When Yun opened the door to the captain's bridge, the air inside was strangely dry. There was a marine magazine on the wall. The last entry was dated June 14, 1942, but the ink was fresh. The fog has reappeared. We went the wrong way. The radio is silent. Someone is knocking on the door. They say it's the wind, but I know it's not the wind. They took the magazine aboard the Sigurd. In the evening, Helga tried to send a message to Bergen, but the connection kept disappearing and coming back. On short waves, amid the crackling and whistling, phrases sometimes broke through, fragments of words in Norwegian, then in German, as if someone was calling on an old military channel. Lars couldn't sleep last night. From his cabin, he could see the silhouette of the Westfall, black, silent, standing on the waves, as if waiting. Suddenly, he noticed a faint glow on one of the decks, as if someone had lit a lamp. He called the captain, but when they came out on deck, the light disappeared. In the morning we decided to explore the lower compartments. We went down the stairs to the engine room. The metal was covered with salt and condensation, but the cars looked almost new. It seemed like they had only recently been stopped. A fresh mark was found on one of the pipes, white paint, printed in the form of a strange symbol, similar to crossed triangles. Yun said that there is no such sign in any known labeling system. But later they found the same symbol on the bulkheads, on the doors, even on the hull of the boat. It was as if someone was trying to leave a trail not for people, but for the ship itself. By noon, the sky had darkened, although it was far from sunset. The wind suddenly picked up, and the sea began to roar. Einar ordered them to return to the Sigurd. But when the boat moved away from the Westfall, radio operator Helga heard a distinct whisper in her headphones, a female voice repeating the same word, stay. The connection was cut off, and a minute later the compass spun again, showing east, west, and north at the same time. No one talked that night. Even Melberg, always cool and confident, looked pale. Everyone felt the same way, they had found something that shouldn't have been there. When the storm finally began, the ship was barely able to stay on course. The Westfall seemed to come to life at that moment, its hull shimmered through the waves, sometimes disappearing completely, sometimes surfacing closer. It seemed that he was not drowning, but moving, breathing with the sea. The wind died down at night, and suddenly it became too quiet. Helga, who was sitting at the radio station, heard a click, and the same whisper went over the air again. Only now was he saying their names. One by one. In the morning, Einar discovered that Yun had disappeared. His bunk was neatly made up, his boots were next to him, and the flashlight was off. On the pillow is a small piece of paper torn out of a magazine, he called. I'm coming. The team was in a panic. They decided to leave the area and head back to the port, but the sea wouldn't let go. The instruments showed that they were circling in one place. Every time they tried to change course, the compass needle returned to the coordinates written in the letter. Then Lars took out the envelope Arvid had given them before they left. The paper was now wet, as if someone had just held it in wet hands. New letters appeared on the back, illegible, as if they had been written in a hurry, you shouldn't have come. When they finally saw the shore, 3 days had already passed, although according to their calculations, only one. But it wasn't Loftholm. The shore seemed alien, the rocks were blacker, the waves beat differently, and the sky had a dull, rusty green hue. The Sigurd anchored, and Einar realized that the coordinates had not changed. Westfall still had them. Only now there was no sign of the ship. In the distance, amidst the fog, a silhouette slowly rose, as if from the sea itself, without sound, without foam. But it was no longer a ship. It was something that had once been him. When dawn broke, the sea stood motionless, as if frozen. The water was no longer rippling, no longer splashing, it was just as smooth as glass. Einar stared at the horizon for a long time, trying to figure out what was going on. The normal current should have carried them far to the north, but the ship was still at the same coordinates. The gyro compass was spinning crazily, and even the needle of an ordinary compass no longer knew where to point. The sun was shining out of a gray sky, but it wasn't warm, its light was cold, metallic, devoid of shadows. There was a tense silence in the wardroom. All 6 of the remaining men were silent, avoiding each other's eyes. Lars tried to check the navigation data, but the numbers on the instrument seemed to have a life of their own. The coordinates were flashing, changing every minute, as if someone invisible was correcting them right on the screen. Thorvald said that at night he heard footsteps in the engine room, heavy, measured, as if someone was walking on iron floors, but when he went down there, everything was quiet. There are boot prints on the floor, extending to the wall and ending nowhere. Helga, exhausted from a sleepless night, tried to contact the shore. The radio was hissing, but at some point, amid the crackling, a clear signal suddenly cut through, short, long pulses, like Morse code. She recorded the sequence and realized that it wasn't random noise at all. The code was old, military style, from World War II. Helga tried to decipher it, and when she succeeded, her blood turned cold. SOS. Westfalen. They're alive. We're waiting. Einar forbade further listening to the broadcast, but the words had already settled in everyone's minds. If the signal is real, it means that someone was still calling. But how? The ship was half underwater, without a crew, without power sources. They saw him with their own eyes. By noon, the fog began to rise again. The water around them changed color from cold blue to thick gray, as if ashes had been dissolved in it. The air had a metallic taste, and every breath was bitter in my teeth. Helga noticed that the barometer needle was behaving strangely, the pressure was jumping, as if they were rising and falling tens of meters, even though the ship was stationary. Suddenly Melberg came up on deck with a Westfall magazine in his hands. He said he had been reading it all night and found something that made him believe the impossible. The last pages of the magazine, the ones where the captain wrote about fog and alien sounds, were written in different handwriting. The first was clear, officer-like, the second was trembling, as if the writer's hand did not belong to a living person. There were strange symbols at the bottom that looked like sea coordinates, but if you put them on a map, you'd get something like a spiral going deep into the ocean. Melberg insisted that these coordinates were not just a record, but a direction. He claimed that the Westfall was not lost, but was dragged somewhere, into a space where time and the current of the sea obey other laws. And now, according to him, Sigurd was on the same threshold. Einar listened in silence. His eyes, usually hard and cold, now seemed burned out. He remembered that on the first day he noticed a strange thing. The depth gauge needle showed that there was at least a kilometer under the keel, but the echo sounder did not return the signal. It's like there's no bottom under them, but an emptiness. By evening, they noticed the lights again. At first, one was dim, like from a lamp behind thick glass, then the second. Lars took the binoculars and froze. A few hundred meters away, directly above the surface of the water, the silhouette of the ship was slowly moving. The same Westfall, only now it looked whole, as if it had come to life. There are shadows on the deck. They walked in a straight line, synchronously, as if they were marching. Thorvald shouted that they should leave, but Einar ordered them to stand. He said that if the ship had returned, it meant that someone wanted them to see it. And indeed, the Westfall seemed to approach on its own. Its hull quietly cut through the surface of the water and stopped just tens of meters away. There were several lamps on board, and in their light the outlines of people flashed by, tall, in naval uniform, but the faces were blurred, as if covered with glass. One of them raised his hand, a precise, slow movement, like a man underwater. Helga screamed in horror, because she realized that the gesture was not a greeting. It was a call. At that moment, the instruments on the Sigurd went crazy. The engine shut down, the generators went silent, the hands of all the dials froze at zero. The same whisper came from the radio, louder and clearer now. The voices were speaking at the same time, in different languages, but the meaning was the same: you came late. The sea began to boil. The waves rose vertically, as if someone was pulling them from below. The ship began to shake. Everyone rushed to the deck, but there they were met by another sound, metallic, booming, as if something had hit the hull from below. Another blow. More. The metal hummed and vibrated, and suddenly thick steam rose from under the water, covering everything with a white haze. When the fog cleared, the Westfall was gone. There were only ripples on the water and a strange smell, sweet and rotten, like old algae. Einar realized that they had completely lost their bearings. The numbers appeared on the instruments again, but now they did not correspond to any maps. It was as if they were drifting in a space where coordinates no longer mattered. The night brought new sounds. The wind was coming from the south, although according to the compass they were facing east. There was a rattling sound, as if someone was walking barefoot on the deck. Lars went out to check and noticed traces of moisture on the handrails. Not rainwater, salty, with an admixture of something oily. The tracks went from the side to the hatch of the engine room. Inside, everything was as it had been during the day. But now there are new symbols on the walls, the same cross triangles, only scratched with nails directly on the metal. Below them are numbers similar to the time, 3:42. When the hand of the clock reached these numbers, the ship shuddered. From the darkness of the engine room came a muffled groan, like the rumble of a pipe. Lars shone his flashlight on no one. Only steam rose from the floor, and quiet breathing could be heard somewhere inside. He ran back, but when he turned around, he noticed that the light of the lantern was falling on the wall where someone had written, "You've already been here." The next morning, Melberg was found in his cabin. He was sitting at his desk, with the Westfall captain's magazine open in front of him, but his face was frozen in an expression of horror. Her eyes were wide open, and her lips were covered in blood. He was holding a compass in his hands, the needle of which was spinning at breakneck speed. No one understood how he died. His body was cold, but there were no signs of violence. Only on the wall next to his bunk, someone wrote in charcoal, "He realized where the north is." After that, Einar ordered the magazine to be burned. Thorvald objected, but the captain insisted, if the source of evil is in the records, they must be destroyed. The papers were thrown into an iron bucket and set on fire, but the fire did not want to take the pages. The flame hissed, went out, and only after a few minutes the paper turned to ashes. However, the smell that remained was not smoke, but something else, acrid, chemical, as if the burning was not paper, but skin. After that, something changed in the sounds of the sea. First, the seagulls disappeared. Then, the usual splash. And finally, when night fell, Lars realized that he couldn't hear his companions breathing. The sounds seemed to disappear one by one, and soon there was only silence, in which the heart was beating too loudly. At 1 o'clock in the morning, he woke up to the fact that someone was standing by his bed. The shadow was tall, elongated, and smelled of salt. He froze, afraid to move. The silhouette slowly bent down, and Lars saw a face, translucent, as if through water, but recognizable. It was Yun, the one who disappeared earlier. His lips moved, but there was no sound. Just a whisper inside my head, "The fog is calling everyone. Don't resist." When he blinked, the figure disappeared. There was only a drop of water left on the floor. At dawn, Einar gathered everyone on deck. There were 4 of them. He said that today they would try to leave by force, they would turn on the engine at full power and go west until they had enough fuel. Thorvald took a seat by the cars, Helga stayed at the radio station. Lars watched the horizon, where the fog began to swirl again, condensing into a huge column, like a vertical whirlpool. When the engine started, the sea exploded into waves. They rushed forward, but it felt like they were standing still. The wind suddenly changed direction and hit him right in the face. The waves were beating against the side, and from the depths came the same rumble, low, long-drawn, like a call. Suddenly, the radio station came to life. A Melberg-like voice came from the speaker, "Don't touch the engine. They won't let go." Helga screamed and pulled the cord, but the voice continued to sound, already out of thin air, as if the ship itself was speaking. The engine suddenly stopped. The ship shook, and all three standing on the deck collapsed. The hull appeared out of the fog ahead, the Westfall again. Only now he was closer than ever. Someone was standing on the deck. Exactly 7. And one of them raised his hand, pointing at them. Helga fell to her knees and began to pray. Einar clenched his fists, staring straight at the approaching ship. It went without a sound, but every meter of it seemed to crash into space. And then Lars realized that their ship wasn't moving, it was the Westfall pulling them towards it. When the hulls almost touched, the light went out. Everything turned black, and only the cold remained, thick, sticky, penetrating under the skin. And then there was silence. When Lars woke up, he was on the other deck. All around, gray metal, rust, the smell of old fuel. Above him is a sooty bulkhead, and on it, scratched with something sharp, Westfalen. When consciousness finally returned, Lars realized that he was lying on a cold metal floor, surrounded by ringing silence. At first, he thought it was all just a nightmare caused by fatigue and the storm, but the smell of rust, the humid air, and the subtle ringing in his ears were all too real. He slowly got to his feet. The deck was dimly lit, as if by artificial light. He could see neither the sun nor the lamps, but a faint flicker came directly from the walls, as if the metal itself radiated a pale glow. Lars took a few steps, listening. The ship was quiet, but somewhere in the distance there was a rattling sound, similar to the dragging sound of a chain. He tried to call out, "Einar! Helga!" But his voice was swallowed up by an echoing void. The echo did not return. This was wrong. On a ship, the sound should be reflected, but here it simply disappeared, as if the air did not want to transmit a human voice. He walked forward, carefully touching the walls, and after a few minutes realized where he was, the corridor leading to the officers' quarters. Everything was familiar and at the same time different. The doors were still there, but the numbers on the signs were different. Instead of 1, 2, 3, the dates were scratched out: June 14, 1942, June 16, 1942, June 17, 1942. Lars froze. He remembered these numbers, they coincided with the last days of entries in the captain's log. He opened the first door a crack. There was a cot inside, a table, and a mug on it, and the liquid was still dark in it, as if someone had left it a minute ago. In the corner hung a uniform with the faded emblem of the Norwegian Navy, although the Westfall was considered a German ship. Lars came closer and took the mug. It was warm. In surprise, he dropped it, and the liquid spilled on the floor. At that moment, a soft sigh was heard from behind. He whirled around. No one. Just a faint tremor in the air, like breathing. He went out and closed the door, trying not to look at the dates. The second door gave way heavily. The air was colder here, and there was a thin trail of water across the floor. There are scratches on the walls, as if someone was trying to get out. And in the center of the room was a marine magazine, open to a page where the inscription could be seen: "He calls from the depths. Don't listen. Don't look at the light." On the next page is a palm print, black as soot or blood. Lars turned another page with difficulty, and froze. His first and last name were written there. Lars O. Anderson. Arrived. 1959. His breathing was labored. He staggered back, stumbled, and hit the wall. Everything inside screamed that it was impossible, but the letters were written in the same handwriting as the rest of the entries. Then he realized that someone knew he would be here. Someone was waiting. Lars ran out into the hallway. The light began to dim, the air became thicker. A metallic sound came from around the corner, as if someone was slowly dragging a chain across the floor. Then a rhythm appeared, measured, heavy steps. They were getting closer. He ran in the opposite direction, towards the stairs. But when he went upstairs, he realized that he was not on deck, but in the engine room. Mechanisms that could not have been there hummed below, they were whole, new, as if they had just been started. The wheels turned, steam rose from the pipes, and the same rhythm could be heard everywhere, like the pulse of a ship. A figure appeared from behind the steam cloud. Lars froze. A man in an old Westphalen uniform. He stood sideways, not moving. The light shone on his face, and Lars realized that his skin was translucent, like a stretched film. His eyes were empty, without whites. The figure turned its head, and a voice like the rustle of leaves said, "You found us." Lars recoiled, but his feet seemed rooted to the floor. The surroundings became darker, and a hissing sound could be heard from behind. When he turned around, 3 more men were standing behind him, all in identical uniforms, without faces. They didn't approach, just stared. Water flowed from under their boots, collecting in rivulets that flowed down to Lars' feet. Suddenly the light went out. The hum of the cars stopped, and in the absolute silence there was a soft ringing, as if a metallic voice was whispering, "Time has not passed." It was waiting. Lars rushed forward, at random, and, running through the airlock, found himself in another compartment. It was dry here, and there were maps on the walls, navigational charts of the Atlantic, dated 1942. But someone added new marks. The coordinates stretched further, not across the sea, but deep into the ocean, as if marking the way down. There was a circle in the center of the map, and in it was a symbol, the same one they had seen on the pipes of the Westfall, cross triangles. There was a drawer on the shelf with envelopes inside. They are all the same, yellow, with the same inscription, Westphalen. Hundreds, maybe thousands. And each one has different coordinates. He took one, the one on top. Opened. The paper inside was clean. But after a few seconds, letters began to appear on it, as if written in invisible ink. "You're next. Send the email." At that moment, a rumble was heard behind the wall, and the ship shuddered. Everything shook, the lamps flickered. Water started oozing out of the hull seams again. He rushed to the stairs and went up. The deck greeted him with wind and dusk. There was no sun above the horizon, just a thick, motionless cloud cover. The wind was blowing strangely, not from the sea, but as if from the very air. And Einar was standing in the middle of the deck. He was looking towards where the fog was beginning to shrink into a giant funnel. His face was deathly pale, and his lips were blue. As Lars got closer, he noticed that the captain was holding a piece of paper in his hands. Einar spoke softly, almost soundlessly. "We didn't leave. We came to where they were calling from." He held out the paper. It was a page from the very magazine they were trying to burn. "There's a fresh entry on it, we arrived at the coordinates. Now they want us to stay." Lars wanted to say that he had to leave, but he saw that behind the captain, right on the water, the silhouette of another vessel loomed again. Not the Westfall, but something else broken, as if made up of fragments, broken, but alive. Its sides rose and fell like a rib cage, and it seemed to be breathing. Light shone through the cracks of the hull, cold, blue, like the reflection of a dead fire. The ship was approaching. The wind picked up. Lars felt that the air had become thicker, as if the sea was pulling all living things inside itself. Einar stepped forward, to the edge of the deck. He stood straight, confident, like a sailor, ready for the last order. And suddenly he jumped, without shouting, without hesitation, straight into the fog. The waves didn't flare up, didn't rise, they just closed in, as if they had swallowed him up. Lars was left alone. In the distance, a noise was heard, low, booming, as if someone was hitting the hull with a giant hammer. The deck creaked, and water began to rise directly from the hatches. It did not flow, but slowly seeped out, like a living being, sliding along the metal. Lars rushed towards the bridge. Everything was swaying. The fog began to glow from within, and in that light he saw faces, dozens, hundreds of faces. Everyone was looking at him. Among them are Helga, Torvald, Jun, Melberg. Everyone was silent, but their eyes were open. He covered his face with his hands and screamed, but no sound came out. The world around him began to blur. When he lowered his arms, the deck disappeared, there was a smooth surface of water under his feet. And ahead, on the horizon, there was that very ship. It was whole, shining, and the word Westfalen could be read on its side again. Lars stepped forward. The water was as warm as blood. He took the second step and realized that he was not drowning. The surface of the sea held him back. Every step brought him closer to the ship. When he got close, a man came down the ramp. In an old navy uniform, with his face half hidden in shadow. He held out his hand. Lars wanted to ask who he was, but his lips wouldn't work. Then the figure leaned over and whispered right into his ear. "We haven't disappeared. We're just waiting for those who remember." When he took the outstretched hand, the world fell into darkness. He woke up on a cot in an unfamiliar room. Outside the window there is a faint morning sun, the smell of sushi, the hum of cars. His heart was beating fast. There was an envelope on the table. Yellow paper. On it is the inscription Westfalen, and the coordinates are carefully printed. Next to the envelope are his own hands. Wet. Salty. A phone rang in the distance. The voice said, "Mr. Anderson? This is the port of Bergen. We have received a strange message. Someone sent us the coordinates." Lars was silent for a long time before answering. He looked at the envelope, then at the window. In the distance, beyond the horizon, there was a faint glimmer, short as a reflection from glass. "Write it down," he said softly, 56 degrees 12 minutes north, 11 degrees 45 minutes west. There's a place I need to check." He hung up, picked up the envelope, and slowly tore it open. There's nothing inside, just the smell of the sea. And yet, when he closed his eyes, somewhere in the back of his mind he heard the same hum, familiar, low, calling. The sea always returns its own. 2 weeks have passed since my return. Or at least that's what the clock, the documents, and the tired faces of the people on the shore said. But for Lars, time stopped where the horizon met the gray sky, and the Westfall rose out of the fog. He was sitting in a small room in Bergen provided by the authorities, for recovery. There was white paint on the walls. The smell of disinfection, and a steady, sterile light that seemed unnatural after long days under the open sea. Every morning they brought him a newspaper, coffee, and questions. The same ones. Where is the ship? Why did it disappear? Why is he the only one who has returned? He didn't answer. He knew that no one would believe him. He could see the polite sympathy in their eyes, which hid distrust. The report stated, probable memory loss due to stress and hallucinations. They wanted to reduce everything to a nervous breakdown, but inside Lars felt that he was still there, among the waves, where the sea breathed and whispered through the steel. Sometimes at night he dreamed of footsteps. The creak of flooring under someone's feet, rhythmic, heavy. Sometimes he woke up to the sound of a siren, a short one, like at the beginning of an alarm, and saw a glare on the wall, similar to the fluctuation of a spotlight. It all started again on the morning of October 23. He was sitting by the window, looking out at the port, when he noticed a familiar silhouette. There was a man in uniform standing on the dock. Dark uniform, faded cap, hands behind his back. At first Lars thought he was imagining things, but the figure stood motionless, staring straight in his direction. When he blinked, the man was gone. Only a seagull flew over the harbor, screamed sharply and disappeared behind the building. A few hours later, there was a knock on the door. A middle-aged man with a tired face and calm eyes stood on the threshold. He introduced himself as Sven Hagen, an investigator with the Maritime Bureau. He spoke smoothly, without pressure. He said that the investigation into the Sigurd case was officially closed, the ship was declared lost, the crew was dead. Only Lars is listed as temporarily disabled. But, Hagen added, there's one more detail. He took an envelope out of the folder. Yellow, with a faded seal. It still has the same word on it, Westfalen. It was found in a shipping crate yesterday, Hagen said. No return address. The coordinates are on the back. And the date. He turned the envelope over. Lars felt a chill run down his spine. The date was tomorrow. 56 degrees 12 minutes north. 11 degrees 45 minutes west. The same one. Of course, we can't know, the investigator continued, maybe one of the pranksters decided to use your story. But the authorities want to double-check. And if you feel that you can, he paused, would you like to come with us? Lars was silent for a long time. Then he asked. How many people are coming? 7. The research team and I. He nodded. 7. Just like last time. The expedition left 3 days later. The ship was called Astrid. A modern ship, new equipment, everything is official. But the air on board was still tense. No one was joking, no one was singing. Even the mechanics were talking in low voices, as if they knew where they were going. Hagen stayed close to Lars, but did not pester with questions. He understood that the past did not need to be disturbed by words. Lars was silent for most of the journey, only occasionally going out on deck and looking at the gray horizon. The weather was calm, but the sea seemed strange. The water did not play, did not splash, but lay motionless, like liquid glass. On the third night, they reached the coordinates. The echo sounder showed the anomaly again, a large metal object at a depth of about 60 meters. Hagen ordered a reduction in speed. All the instruments were working properly, but Lars noticed that the compass needle was shaking, not much, but with the same frequency that he remembered back then. At 2 o'clock in the morning, fog appeared on the water. He rose instantly, as if he had burst out from underwater. The crew became alarmed, someone joked about sea breath, but the laughter quickly subsided. The wind was gone. The whole universe seemed to freeze at one point. For the first time, a searchlight was turned down from the deck of the Astrid, and the beam of light rested on the metal. A huge hull, twisted by time, but still intact. The inscription on the side was barely legible, but it could be read, Westfalen. Hagen swore, and someone crossed themselves. Lars stood motionless. He knew this was going to happen. He knew that this was how it should be. They lowered an underwater probe with a camera. Images flashed across the screen, dark bulkheads, rusted ladders, broken crates. Everything seemed dead. But then, when the camera turned to the bow, everyone saw a light. It was small and wavering, as if someone had lit a lantern inside the ship. It's a reflection, the technician said. But Hagen remained silent, staring at the screen. The camera recorded movement in the lens. Not a fish, not a bubble, but a shadow that passed by the wall, smoothly, confidently, as if someone was really walking along the corridor. The signal went dead. The camera went out. The connection is lost, the technician said. The cable is intact. It's just, there's no signal. Hagen ordered the probe to be lifted. But when the cable started to be pulled, the winch creaked. Something was holding him down. After a minute, the thrust increased, the cable stretched to its limit. And then the ship shuddered. The water around them suddenly began to boil, and the compasses went crazy again. Lars stood at the side and saw something rising right from under the surface. First, a bubble, then a splash, then a piece of metal. No, it's not a trapdoor. It was slowly opening slightly, as if someone inside was pulling it from the inside. Thick steam and the smell of rust and rot came out of the crack. Everyone retreated except Lars. He was looking straight into this rift, where the outlines of the deck were already beginning to appear. She rose, surfacing like a body. When the water ran out, everyone saw the faded number and rope marks. The ship was intact. There was no sign of prolonged exposure to water. It's like it's just been built. There are lamps on board, burning with a steady warm light. And then a voice came from the speaker. Hoarse but recognizable. This is Sigurd. We ask for help. We've lost our course. Come in, over. Everyone froze. The technician checked the frequency with trembling hands. The signal was coming not from outside, but directly from the depths, from the coordinates of the Westfall. It's impossible, someone whispered. The Sigurd was lost 17 years ago. Hagen was looking at Lars. He did not take his eyes off the hull of the ship. It's them, he said softly. They're calling. Who are they? Hagen asked. Lars did not answer immediately. Those who returned before us. By morning, the sea was calm again. No one was sleeping. At dawn, they discovered that one of the crew members, a young sailor named Thomas, had disappeared from the ship. His boots were by the railing. Nearby there are wet footprints leading to the edge of the deck, but no footprints. There is white paint on the handrail in the shape of two crossed triangles. Then Hagen realized that the jokes were over. He ordered a team to be assembled to leave the area. But the devices refused to work again. The engines stalled, the arrows froze. It seemed that the sea was holding them in place. Lars stood at the wheelhouse and said, "It won't let go. Time doesn't move while we're here. We are a part of it." Hagen grabbed him by the shoulder. "What are you talking about?" "We're not looking for a ship," Lars replied. At sunset, the fog turned golden. The light fell as if the sun was burning inside the water. Hagen noticed lines on the horizon, thin and even, like reflections from something metallic. An hour later it became clear, it's another ship. It was moving straight towards them, slowly, confidently. As it came closer, Hagen realized with horror that he was seeing Astrid. An exact replica of their ship. The same antennas, the same coloring, even the flag. But everything was a little different, like a reflection in which the corners are distorted. There were people on the deck. 7 of them. One imitated Hagen's every move exactly. The other is Lars. The wind died down. Both ships were facing each other, as if in a mirror. And suddenly the reflection began to move, not forward, not backward, but as if towards them in another dimension. The metal hummed. A vibration filled the air. Lars closed his eyes and heard a voice. Female. Quiet, but distinct. The same one that sounded on the Sigurd radio broadcast many years ago. "Help. We're here." He opened his eyes and saw new buildings rising out of the fog. One by one. Westfall. Sigurd. Another Westfall. They multiplied like reflections in water, each one a little closer, each one more distinct. Figures moved between them, in uniform, without faces, in white spots of light. Hagen shouted for the engines to start, but no one listened. The metal howled. The sea became thick and viscous. Everything was shaking. And then Lars realized, the sea doesn't just store memories. It's rewriting it. He grabbed the compass, the one that had been found in Melberg's cabin. The needle was spinning non-stop. He looked at Hagen and said, "The north is not there. The north is down now." Before anyone could respond, the ship lurched violently. Everyone fell to the deck. A rumble came from under the water, as long as a giant's exhalation. Lars got down on his knees and looked into the waves. Lights could be seen through the water, entire cities, streets, silhouettes of houses. But these were not human cities. It was a world of ships standing in rows, like in a dock. Dozens, hundreds, each with its own story. All the missing ships gathered down here. Then he realized where the coordinates led. They weren't pointing to a place, but to a direction, down, under the water, to where time had stopped. The wind howled. The sea began to pull the Astrid inside itself. Hagen ordered the anchor to be unhooked, but the cables were already stretched like sinews. The deck was cracking. People were screaming. At that moment, the signal came from the radio again. A man's voice, hoarse. "This is Astrid. We found them. We're going down." The last thing Lars saw was the water closing over the ship, and lights breaking through the thickness. At that moment, he realized that the sea wasn't evil. It just remembers everyone who ever called for help on it. And now it's collecting them to keep them from disappearing. And up in Bergen, a week after the storm, an envelope was found in the post office. Thick yellow paper. It has an inscription, Westfalen. Inside is a short letter. "Help. We're here. 56 degrees 12 minutes north, 11 degree 45 foot W." The date on the back was October 31, 2025. And signed, L. Anderson. Bergen, November. The city stood in silence soaked with rain. It smelled of salt, fish, and the wet wood of the wharves. A light fog was rising from the sea, not the kind that brings a storm, but a viscous one, settling on the shoulders, as if the air itself had decided to stay in port. The envelope found a week ago was now in a glass case on the second floor of the Maritime Museum. People came, looked, and took pictures. Signed, L. Anderson has become the subject of newspaper articles and academic controversies. Some claimed that it was a forgery, others that the letter was written from an authentic ship's letterhead from the 1950s, the paper matched, the ink was old. But no one could explain how the date of next year appeared on it. The official investigation was closed. The ship Astrid was reported missing on the high seas. Sven Hagen and his team are missing. The Bergen radio station received the last signal from them, a short message that was interrupted in the middle. A record has been preserved in the logs of the transmitter, exactly 4 words uttered in a strange, distorted voice. "We have found Westfall." In the same days, a man appeared in Bergen. He was pale, unshaven, and his eyes were as empty as glass. He was wearing an old dark raincoat, unseasonably wet. He was seen in the morning at the harbor, standing looking at the horizon, where gray fog mixed with rain. No one knew who he was. No one asked. But in the evening he entered the museum. The caretaker, a tired old man named Olaf, heard footsteps and looked up from the magazine. There should have been no more visitors. The man was standing in front of the showcase. He stared at the envelope for a long time, as if reading it with his eyes. Then he said softly, "Paper is warmer than glass." Olaf didn't understand. He came closer. But when I looked up, the man was gone. There are only wet footprints on the floor leading to the door. The next day, a palm print was found on the glass of the showcase. Slightly moist, as if a person had just touched it. A new piece of paper appeared inside the envelope. Thin, translucent, as if embedded through a wall. There are coordinates on it. The same ones. And a short inscription. The last flight has been completed. Everything is returned. The scientific community was seething. The newspapers called it the hoax of the century. Experts checked everything from paper to fingerprints. But the strangeness was something else. The fingerprint belonged to Lars Anderson, who disappeared on board the Astrid. When his personal file was brought up in the archives, they found that the dossier was incomplete. Several sheets have been replaced with copies with indistinct stamps. On one of them is the signature of Senior Engineer Westphal, circled in pencil, but without a date. The archivist noticed that the signature matched the shape and pressure of the handwriting on the envelope. It turned out that the same hand wrote letters decades later. In the spring of the following year, an object washed ashore. A small, rusty, but preserved compass. The needle was rotating continuously, as if there was a memory of movement left in him. It is stamped on the back cover, L.A. The compass ended up in the university laboratory, where it was opened. Inside, under a glass lid, they found a tiny piece of paper. There are illegible words on it, but one of the researchers was able to read, "Below the horizon line." Then one of the professors who studied the disappearance of ships in the North Atlantic compiled a report. He suggested that a rare phenomenon occurs in the area of the coordinates indicated on the envelopes, a distortion of the magnetic field, creating local time loops. But in the same report, he added a handwritten note. If that's true, then those who entered there no longer belong to our time. In the summer, the Norwegian government sent a new expedition, an international one. The ship St. Maria, equipped with modern navigation systems, has arrived at the point. There are scientists, military personnel, and journalists on board. They lowered the probe with the video camera. The signal went on for exactly 10 minutes. At first, it was just darkness. Then there are metallic shadows. And finally, the appearance of the ship. Westphal. Only now it looked as if it had never sunk, the sides were intact, the paint was fresh, and the flag was waving. There are silhouettes of people on the deck. They stood motionless, as if they were waiting. The camera zoomed in, and everyone gasped. One of them was Sven Hagen. The other is Lars Anderson. They were standing next to each other, looking up at the camera. Lars' face was calm, as if he had finally realized where he belonged. Then he raised his hand and showed something, a sign that looked like crossed triangles. The very symbol that was found on board the Astrid. The sound on the air was distorted. Someone whispered into the microphone. "Calm. Everything is calm." And the broadcast stopped. 2 days later, the ship St. Mary returned. All the team members were alive. But what is strange is that the time elapsed on board according to the clock was 4 hours. And according to coastal measurements, it's 13 days. No one has been able to explain how this is possible. All the instruments recorded different dates. The captain's log ended with the line, "The sea holds what it remembers." In the autumn of the same year, the museum in Bergen received the package again. This time without a stamp and without an address. Inside is an old spool of magnetic tape. It was listened to in the presence of the commission. The recording hissed and creaked, but the voice was distinguishable. The 12th day. We went over the horizon. The waves are motionless. A rumble can be heard underwater, like breathing. We see lights that look like cities. Time is going backwards. The faces on the deck reflect us. We are their continuation. We are their echo. Everything is returned. End of communication. The voice belonged to Lars Anderson. After that, there were no more letters or recordings. But fishermen working in those waters said that sometimes on windless nights, when the sea becomes a mirror, light appears on the horizon. It's like a spotlight passing through the waves, slowly and attentively. And if you look there for a long time, you can make out the shadow of the ship. It goes noiselessly, without splashes, and there are glowing cabin lights on board. There is an inscription on the stern, Westfalen. They say that if you turn on the radio at 128.3 MHz, you can hear a faint signal, a crackle, a rustle, and then a short message. Calm. Everything is calm. We're going home. Many years later, in 1989, an archivist named Christian Merck found an old marine observation log from World War II among the decommissioned documents. On the last page, in faded ink, it was written: "If the sea takes away, it means it remembers. It doesn't kill. It returns in its own way." Signed, Melberg, engineer of the ship, Westfall. The real solution remained elusive. Some believed that Westfall had become part of a time loop, a fragment of space where the past and the future merged. Others believed that these were just coincidences, perceptual errors, and the human need to find meaning where there is none. But the sea, it doesn't need faith. It remembers. And if one night someone receives an email without an address, with coordinates and the short words, "Help. We're here." No need to answer. Because perhaps the letter has already arrived from inside the calm. And somewhere there, below the horizon, where time and memory do not work, the ships continue their eternal journey. Westfall goes first, followed by Sigurd, Astrid and dozens of others. Their sides shine with a soft, amber light, like stained glass windows underwater. The people on the deck stand quietly, like keepers of old dreams. They don't ask to come back. They're just walking. And if you listen closely, you can hear the same whisper that started it all.